This is gonna upset a lot of people, but I have to address it because I feel like I'm going crazy with all the conspiracy theory level discourse coming from very smart people right now. And I'm hoping that everyone's just having like a whole lot of fun, but it's getting concerning. It is not that crazy to think that he is the guy. It is not that crazy. It is not that hard to believe. Let's go through this point by point. Okay, number one, the early photos. Clothing and backpack are different. Okay, these were taken on 2 different days. Different clothing, different backpack, not that weird. Then there's the nose bridge. Okay, you know that people look different in different photos. Otherwise, you would never have asked anyone to retake a photo before. Have you ever done that? Have you ever asked someone to retake a photo of you because you didn't look great in one photo or another? Yeah, you understand this. But if that's not enough, let's look at lighting first, okay? So look at the bridge of my nose. Wow, it's almost like it looks like it's 2 different shapes, huh? It's almost like my face looks completely different in different lighting situations. It's almost like that's why a bunch of us have these lights and put them right here to face us from the front, because we know that that is very flattering in most cases. And if that weren't enough, you also know that camera angle makes a difference, especially if you're like me and you're a millennial and you were alive for this era. Now it's a lot of this. You have a good side? Do you know what your good side is? Okay, you understand this. Add to that that different cameras and different lenses and focal lengths do different things to the face. I work in film, this is a fact. It's a lot harder to show you on my phone, but if you have a camera with a zoom lens, try it out. Point it at a face and zoom in and out, or just Google it. You can see different focal lengths and how they affect the face. Number 2 big thing I'm seeing. If he left a backpack in Central Park, how was he still carrying a backpack when they picked him up? Remember the 2 backpacks in the 2 different photos on 2 different days? Well, that's one explanation. But also, I would like to know what you believe the real perpetrator is doing right now on the run. Is he on the run without a backpack? Is he just not carrying anything around with him? Do you think it's possible that this person planned to leave a backpack behind and made sure to have a second backpack with him to carry everything he needed to carry with him? If you were going on the run, would you just be carrying what's in your pockets? Would you be carrying a briefcase? Maybe a satchel? Or would you be carrying a backpack? Number 3, why was he still carrying the items around? Number 1, a fake ID is not easy to come by. It just isn't. Number 2, the device he was carrying was 3D printed. Also not easy to come by. It's possible he had more targets in mind. In fact, one of the first written sentences that was reported on among, the writing he was carrying around with him made a reference to multiple. I believe it was they had it coming. Multiple people. So it's very possible he had more targets in mind. So he wasn't going to ditch the one tool he had. Or did you want him to carry around 5 of them? If he'd been picked up with 5 different 3D printed ones, would that have been better? Would that have been smarter? Logically, it stands to reason that carrying around a manifesto, he understood that eventually he probably would be apprehended. And if he, in fact, was going to be eventually apprehended, he probably knew that having those items would not be the thing that did him in. Once he was apprehended, it's because it was game over and someone had identified him and he had been located accurately. The thing with ideologically motivated actions like this is that the ideology and the perpetrators need to be very clear about what it means and why it was done. And a lot of times that involves identifying oneself. You need to be able to claim the action on behalf of the ideology it's supposed to further. Number 4, I think. How could this genius who did that be so dumb as to get caught like that? Okay, what was so genius about it? And I know that people are going to hear this wrong, but I'm asking, what was so genius about it? He stopped for coffee right before. Days earlier, he pulled down his mask. And I know you say you don't believe that the guy who pulled down his mask is the same guy, but okay, the guy who pulled down his mask reportedly spent several days in this hostel with the mask on 24/7. Would eat with the mask on, would sleep with the mask on, spoke to no one. So whoever that guy is, if you don't think it's the same guy, whoever that guy is was purposefully hiding his face that whole time as well, and yet even he pulled the mask down in one moment of flirtatious weakness. And this guy apparently just appeared out of nowhere. Like, you guys understand that those cameras really do cover almost every inch of Manhattan, right? Like, the whole reason they can figure out who it is because they can see him coming from miles away. Anytime he steps into the subway, anytime he comes out, the cameras are going to catch him, and you can basically follow someone around the city. What's more embarrassing is that it took so many police resources to, in fact, do that. He then entered Central Park and then emerged from Central Park, basically wearing pretty much the same thing and still on a bike, which, by the way, to me proves not a genius. Sorry. Central Park is the one place where he had like significant portions that were not covered by cameras. That is the one place that he could have actually like switched outfits completely, ditched the bike or switched to another type of vehicle, something else completely, and walked out. And it would have slowed police down. Would it have completely stopped them or prevented them from figuring out who he was? No, because you know what they would have done? They would have combed through all the footage for hours, documenting everyone who entered the park and everyone who exited the park for hours. And they would have eventually figured out who exited the park that they had not caught on camera entering it. So it would have slowed them down. Would it have made it impossible to keep tracking him? Absolutely not. Next, he went to a bus depot. Now, they didn't have footage of him getting on a bus, so they didn't know which one he got on, but they knew exactly what buses left during that several hour window. From there, they also knew that he had left the state because that's where all the buses were going. So that's what gets the FBI involved, because now it becomes an interstate or federal crime. The FBI brings more resources, okay? They also now know all the possible bus stations he might have ended up at. They can now contact authorities around all of those stations and say, hey, we're gonna need you to start pulling footage from around those stations, and we're gonna start seeing if we can find this guy. Does it take time? Yes. But in the meantime, that means they can also prioritize tips coming in from these areas. Do you think that was the only tip called in? No. I would genuinely be very surprised if it was. It's not impossible, but I would be surprised. People saying that they don't believe that a McDonald's employee could have identified this guy just based on the images. Okay, but I saw like 2 or 3 TikTokers who went super viral because of how much they looked like the guy. And it wasn't every single TikToker, no, it was specifically a group of them. And from the beginning, especially in that smiling photo, he looked a lot like James Franco. We all saw it. And lo and behold, so does this guy. By the time they received this tip, they had probably already reviewed a lot of the footage around these bus stations and known the general area that he probably ended up in. And by the way, it makes sense that they would not have announced that publicly because number one, it would help them to weed out tips between like reliable ones and non-reliable ones. And also releasing that information might have tipped him off to knowing that they were actually genuinely closing in on the basic area that he ended up in, which would have been covered by fewer cameras and would have been easier for him to disappear from. While in custody, he was caught on camera yelling that this was completely out of touch and an insult to the intelligence of the American people. That sounds like someone who is specifically talking about his arrest. What's out of touch? The authorities going after him. What's an insult to the intelligence of the American people? Going after him. Other people are suggesting that him pleading not guilty is somehow evidence that he's a patsy. What do you think people are talking about when they talk about jury nullification? Jury nullification does not occur if you plead guilty and go to prison for the rest of your life without putting up a fight. If you think it was justified and righteous, you want him to plead not guilty. Otherwise, he doesn't, there's no other avenue for him. Now, do I think it's crazy that the NYPD spent so many resources finding this one guy when there have been nearly 400 unalivings in New York City in this year to date, and they have not spent a fraction of those resources on any of those? Yeah, it's crazy. But does that mean that this guy, someone who has been struggling with chronic pain for years, is not the guy? When that is, by the way, something that a lot of people theorized could be motive in this whole thing before any suspect was presented? No, of course not. A healthy amount of skepticism is always good. But unless you have actual evidence, like making this impossible or like truly, truly improbable, like reasons like he's too smart for that, or like, I don't believe he would make that mistake, that's not evidence enough, because this guy from the beginning has made multiple mistakes, and that's okay, right? I mean, it's okay. It's just evidence of how much you have deified the guy before ever figuring out who he was. Like, you think he is superhuman and incapable of making any sort of mistake. Listen, feel however you want to feel about this whole thing. And of course, legally, everything is still alleged. But if we're gonna use this whole thing to talk about the way different people in power conspire to take advantage of us, like, let's focus on the real conspiracies.